Hi everyone. This is my second video because I realized I have other deadlines for tomorrow. Apparently, we have our first quiz in Ethics 1, and I haven't read any of the modules that might pop out in tomorrow's quiz. Let's see if I can finish all of my Ethics 1 module one readings in one sitting. So they had us watch a 40-minute documentary titled Saving Face. It's a nice 40-minute documentary. It talks about the situation in Middle East wherein a lot of women suffer from acid attacks, most of the time from their husbands or from random people entering their homes and then splashing acid on their faces. So it's a heavy 40 minutes, but it's a nice video to watch. So I found a copy of the film in YouTube. Just look for Saving Face. I think it was filmed 2013. So yeah. And now let's start the reading for Ethics 1, which has the title of Module 1, Ethics, Mores, and Values. So this module aims to analyze the nature of mores and values in ethics. It discusses the interplay between the individual as a free moral agent and his or her society or environment, as well as the process of value experience, including the difference between values and moral values. In broad strokes, it gives a background on the nature of morality and the mores, which are the subject matter of ethics. It examines the nature of mores, including the development of the notion of what is right in our culture. The module also examines the notion of freedom as it relates to morality, together with a wide range of values and moral values, including the nature and basis of choices we make. So, Part 1, the realm of morality, ethics, and more. So, ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with the systematic questioning and critical examination of the underlying principles of morality. Ethics came from the root word ethos, which refers to the character of a culture. Ethos includes the attitude of approval or disapproval in a particular culture at a given time and place. The subject matter being studied in ethics is morality. Morality came from the root word mores, which refers to the customs, including the customary behavior of a particular group of people. This constitutes the core of the attitudes and beliefs of a particular group of people. Therefore, mores in Latin and ethos in Greek both refer to customary behavior. Okay. Ethics as the study of moral goodness or badness or the righteousness or rightness, and wrongness of an act. And it has two general approaches, normative and meta ethics. Normative ethics answers the question, what is good? It pertains to norms and standards of goodness and the rightness or wrongness of an act. A comprehensive normative ethical system tries to give a moral framework where its standards of morality are based. An example is Christian ethics, with its well defined and clear parameters and definition of what is good and bad based on its comprehensive framework. Metaethics, on the other hand, examines the pre presuppositions, meanings, and justifications of ethical concepts and principles. For example, instead of assuming that there is an objective moral truth, metaethics will question the for basis for this by asking whether or not morality is objective or subjective, or by posing questions about the assumption of moral theory, such as what is your justification for claiming in your theory that pleasure is good? The study of ethics and morality entails an analysis of both the individual human person acting as a free moral agent and his or her society with its social rules and sanctions that set limitations on individual behavior. Individual behavior is governed by a sense of what is the right thing to do, which is based on the customs or mores of a particular society. For example, the way parents raise their children is governed by the mores of their society. 1.1, the role of society in the individual in the emergence of mores. William Graham Summer, a well known sociologist and anthropologist, claims that our notion of what is right stems from our basic instinct to survive. That is, humans form groups in order to meet the task of survival, and from living in groups, they observe best practices and develop the most practical way of doing things. From these practices emerge traditions and notions of the right thing to do. For example, for each group of people, there is a right way of catching game, a right way of treating guests, and a right way of dressing up. Sumner refers to these notions of right and true as folkways. Sumner states further that Morse came from folkways with the added element of societal welfare embodied in them. In order to preserve society and its accepted norms and practices, the individual consciously or unconsciously defends and upholds society's notions of what is right. At the same time, the group as a whole develops social rules and sanctions, which may be implicit or explicit, in order to preserve the group practices and to control the behavior of the individual for the purpose of maintaining order in society. Thus, customs emerge out of repeated practices, while from the individual observance of group practices emerge habits. This becomes the culture of a particular group or society. Mores become the compelling reason to do what ought to be done because it is the right thing to do to preserve and protect society. Morse exerts social pressure on the individual to conform to society's expectations in terms of character and behavior, that is, to come as close as possible to the ideal man or woman. Hmm. Activity 1. Read Sumner's The Case of Ethical Relativism in Philosophy, the Basic Issues. 496 to 511, and then answer the question below on what you understood from reading. How do you develop your notion of what is the right thing to do in society and what is the connection between your choices as an individual and that of society? Okay. Um, to what extent do mores of your society shape your notion of good or bad or right or wrong? Do mores change? How? Cite an example. Okay. So we have to look for the case of ethical relativism. I think I found that earlier. Uh, yeah, I got it. From page what? Okay, they already got the first few pages that I need to go through. Um, wait. 496 to 511. So just in case you you'd like to know how we are doing our classes in UP Open University, it's a bunch of readings and it kind of looks like self-study. So the question now is at what extent would you be making the most out of the readings that you have? And yeah, so let's see. Let's read Ethics Chapter 45, The Case of Ethical Relativism by William Sumner. Um, yeah. Number one, definition and mode of origin of folkways. If we put together all that we have learned from anthropology and ethnography about primitive men and primitive society, we perceive that the first task of life is to live. Oh, men begin with acts, not with thoughts. Every moment brings necessities which must be satisfied at once. Need was the first experience, and it was followed at once by a blundering effort to satisfy it. It is generally taken for granted that men inherited some guiding instincts from their beast ancestry, and it may be true, although it has never been proven. If there were such inheritances, they controlled and aided the first efforts to satisfy needs. Analogy makes it easy to assume that the ways of beasts had produced channels of habit and predisposition along which dexterities and other psychophysical activities would run easily. Experiments with newborn animals show that in the absence of any experience of the relation of means to ends, efforts to satisfy needs are clumsy and blundering. The method is that of trial and failure, which produces repeated pain, loss, and disappointments. Nevertheless, it is the method of rude experiments and selection. Early efforts of men were of this kind. Need was an impelling force. Pleasure and pain on one side, and on the other were the rude constraints which defined the line of which efforts must proceed. The ability The ability to distinguish between pleasure and pain is the only physical power which is to be assumed. Thus, ways of doing things were selected which were impedent. They answered the purpose better than other ways or with less toil and pain. Along the course on which efforts were compelled to go, habit, routine, and skill were developed. The struggle to maintain existence was carried on, not individually, but in groups. Each profited by the other's experience, hence, there was a concurrence towards that which proved to be most expedient. All at last adopted the same way for the same purpose, hence, the ways turned into customs and became mass phenomena. Instincts were developed in connection with them. In this way, folkways arise. The young learn them by tradition, imitation, and authority. The folkways at the time provide for all the needs of life then and there. They are uniform, universal in the group, imperative, and invariable. As time goes on, the folkways become more and more arbitrary, positive, and imperative. If asked why they act in a certain way in a certain case, primitive people always answer that it is because they and their ancestors always have done so. A sanction also arises from ghost fear. The ghosts of ancestors would be angry if the living should change the ancient ways or ancient folkways. Folkways are made unconsciously. It is the first importance to note it. It is of the first importance to notice that from the first acts by which men try to satisfy needs, each act stands by itself and looks no further than the immediate satisfaction. From the recurrent needs arise habits for the individual and customs for the group, but these results are consequences which were never conscious and never foreseen or intended. They are not noticed until they have long existed, and it is still longer before they are appreciated. Another long time must pass, and a higher stage of mental development must be reached before they can be used as a basis from which to deduce rules for meeting, in the future, problems whose pressure can be foreseen. The folkways, therefore, are not creations of human purpose and wit. They are like products of natural forces which men unconsciously set in operation, or they're like the instinctive ways of animals which are developed out of experience, which reach a final form of maximum adaptation to an interest, which are handed down by tradition and admit of no exception or variation, yet changed to meet new conditions, still within the same limited methods, and without rational reflection or purpose. From this, it results that all the life of human beings, in all ages and stages of culture, is primarily controlled by a vast mass of folkways handed down from one or the earliest existence of the race having the nature of the ways of other animals, only the topmost layers of which are subject to change and control, and have been somewhat modified by human philosophy, ethics, and religion, and by other acts of intelligent reflection. Folkways due to false inference. Furthermore, folkways have been formed by accident, that is, by irrational and incongruous action based on pseudo knowledge. In Molembo, a pestilence broke out soon after Portuguese had died there. After the natives took the possible measures not to allow any white man to die in their country, okay, on the Nicobar Islands, some natives who had just begun to make pottery died. The art was given up and never again attempted. White men gave to one bushman in Kral a stick ornamented with buttons as a symbol of authority. The recipient died, leaving the stick to his son. The son soon died. Ooh. Then the bushman brought back the stick, lest all should die. Until recently, no building of incombustible materials could be built in any big town of the central province of Madagascar on the account of some ancient prejudice. Soon after the Yakuts saw a camel for the first time, smallpox broke out amongst them. They thought the camel to be the agent of the disease. A woman amongst the same people contracted an endogamous marriage. She soon afterwards became blind. This was thought to be the account of the violation of ancient customs. A very great number of such cases could be collected. In fact, they represent the current mode of reasoning of nature people. It is their custom to reason that one thing follows another. It is due to it. A great number of customs are traceable to the notion of the evil eye, many more to ritual notions of uncleanness. No scientific investigation could discover the origin of folkways mentioned. If the origin had not chanced to become known to civilized men, we must believe the known cases illustrate the irrational and incongruous origin of many folkways. In civilized history, also, we know that customs have owed their origin to historical accident. The vanity of the princess, the deformity of a king, the whim of democracy, the love intrigue of a statesman or prelate. By the institutions of another age, it may be provided that no one of these things can affect decisions, acts, or interests, but then the power to decide the ways may have passed to clubs, trade unions, trusts, commercial rivals, wire pullers, politicians, and political fanatics. In these cases, also the causes and origins may escape investigation. Harmful folkways. There are folkways which are positively harmful. Even often, these are just the ones for which a definite reason can be given. The destruction of a man's goods at his death is direct deduction from otherworldliness. The dead man is supposed to want in the other world just what he wanted here. The destruction of a man's goods at his death was a great waste of capital, and it must have had a disastrous effect on the interests of the living. It must have very seriously hindered the development of civilization. With this custom, we must class all the expenditure of labor and capital on graves, temples, pyramids, rites, and sacrifices, and support of priests so far as these were supposed to benefit the dead. The faith in goblinism produced otherworldly interests which overruled ordinary worldly interests. Food have often been forbidden which were plentiful, the prohibition of which injuriously lessened the food supply. There is a tribe of Bushmen who will eat no goat's flesh, although the goats are the most numerous domestic animals in the district. Where totemism exists, it is regularly accompanied by a taboo on eating the totem animal. Whether may be the real principle of principle in totemism, it overrules the interest in an abundant food supply. The origin of the sacred regard paid to the cow must be sought in primitive nomadic life of the Indo-European race, because it is common to Iranians and Indians of Hindustan. The Libyans ate oxen but not cows. The same was true in the Phoenicians and Egyptians. In some cases, the sense of food taboo is not to be learned. It may have been entirely capricious. Muhammad would not eat lizards because he thought them the offspring of a metamorphosed clan of Israelites. On the other hand, the protective taboo, which forbade killing crocodiles, pythons, cobras, and other animal enemies of man, was harmful to his interests. Whether the motive, whatever the motive, it seems to be a fixed article of belief throughout southern India that all who have willfully or accidentally killed a snake, especially a cobra, will certainly be punished, either in this life or the next, in one of three ways, either by childlessness, or by leprosy, or by ophthalmia. Where this faith exi- exists, man has a greater interest to spare a cobra than to kill it. India furnishes a great number of cases of harmful Moors. In India, every tendency of humanity seems intensified and exaggerated. No country in the world is so conservative in its traditions, yet no country has undergone so many religious changes and vici- ha, vicissitudes. Okay. every year a thousand every year thousands perish of disease that might recover if they would take proper nourishment and drink the medicine that science prescribes, but which they imagine that their religion forbids them to touch. How true and right are found. If a savage puts his hand too near to the fire, he suffers the pain and draws it back. He knows nothing of the laws of the radiation of heat, but his instinctive action confirms to that law as if he did know it. If he wants to catch an animal for food, he must study its habits and prepare a device adjusted to those habits. If it fails, he must try again until his observation is true and his device is right. All the practical and direct element in folkways seems to be due to common sense, natural reason, intuition, or some other original mental endowment. It seems rational or rationalistic and utilitarian. Often in the mythologies, this ultimate rational element was ascribed to the teaching of a god or a culture hero. In mythology, it is accounted for as natural, although the ways adopted must always be really true and right in relation to facts, for otherwise they could not answer their purpose, such is not the primitive notion of true and right. The folkways are rights, and morals. The folkways are the right ways to satisfy all interests because they are traditional and exist in fact. They extend over the whole of life. There is a right way to catch game, to win a wife, to make oneself appear, to cure disease, to honor ghosts, to treat comrades or strangers, to behave when child is born, on the warpath, in council, and so on in all cases which arise. The ways are identified in the negative side, that is, by taboos. The right way is the way which the ancestors used and which has been handed down. The tradition is its own warrant. It's not held subject to verification by experience. The notion of right is in the folkways. It's not outside of them, of independent origin and brought to them to test them. In the folkways, whatever is right. This is because they are traditional and therefore contain in themselves the authority of ancestral ghosts. When we come to folkways, we are at the end of our own analysis. The notion of right and ought is the same in regard to all of the folkways, but the degree of it varies with the importance of the interest at stake. The obligation of conformable and cooperative action is far greater under the ghost of fear and war than in other matters, and the social sanctions are severer because group interests are supposed to be at stake. Some usages contain only a slight element of right and ought, It may well be believed that notions of right and duty and of social welfare were first developed in connection with ghost fear and otherworldliness, and therefore that in that field also folkways were first raised to Moors. Rights are the rules of mutual give and take in the competition of life, which are imposed on comrades in the in group in order that the peace may prevail there, which is essential to the group's strength. Therefore, rights can never be natural or God given or absolute in any case or sense. The morality of a group at a time is the sum of the taboos and prescriptions of the folkways by which right conduct is defined. Therefore, morals can never be intuitive, they are historical, institutional, and empirical. World philosophy, life policy, rights, and morality are all products of folkways. They are reflections on and generalizations from the experience of pleasure and pain, which is one in efforts to carry on the struggle of existence under actual life conditions. The generalizations are very crude and vague in their germinal forms. They are all embodied in folklore, and all our philosophy and science have been developed out of them. Chapter 7: Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the technical name for this view of things in which one's own group is the center of everything, and all others are scaled and rated with reference to it. Folkways correspond to it to cover both the inner and outer relation. Each group nourishes its own pride and vanity, boasts itself superior, exalts its own divinities, and look with contempt to outsiders. Each group thinks its folkways the only right ones, and if it observes that other groups have other folkways, they excite its scorn. Opprobrious epithets are derived from these differences: pig eater, cow eater, uncircumcised, jabberers are epithets of contempt and abomination. The Tupi is called the Portuguese by a derisive epithet descriptive of birds which have feathers around their feet, an account of trousers. For our present purpose, the most important fact is that ethnocentrism leads a people to exaggerate and intensify everything in their own folkways, which is peculiar and which differentiates them from others. It therefore strengthens the folkways. Chapter 8: Illustrations of Ethnocentrism. The Papuans in New Guinea are broken up into village units, which kept separate by hostility, cannibalism, headhunting, and the divergencies of language and religion. Each village is integrated by its own language, religion, and interests. A group of villages is sometimes united into a limited unity by connubium. A wife taken inside of its group unit has full status, uh, while when taken outside of it has not. The petty group units are peace groups within and are hostile to all outsider. The Mbayas of South America believed that their deity had bidden them live by making war on others, taking their wives and property and killing their men. When Caribs were asked whence they came, they answered, "We alone are people." The meaning of the name Kiowa is real or principal people. The Lapps call themselves men or human beings. The Greenland Eskimo think that Europeans have been sent to Greenland to learn virtue and good manners from the Greenlanders. Your highest form of praise for your European is that he is or soon will be as good as a Greenlander. The readings are in photocopy, and they are photocopied from books, and some of the letters are unreadable. call themselves men. As a rule, it is found that nature peoples call themselves men. Others are something else, perhaps not defined, but not real men. In myths, the origin of their own tribe is that of the real human race. They do not account for others. The Ainos derives their name from that of the first man. Am I reading Game of Thrones? Whom they worship as a god. Evidently, name of the god is derived from the tribe name. When the tribal name has another sense, it's always boastful or proud. The Ovambo name is a corruption of the name of the tribe for themselves, which means the wealthy. Amongst the most remarkable people in the world for ethnocentrism are the Seri of Lower California. They observe an attitude of suspicion and hostility to all outsiders and strictly forbid marriage with outsiders. The Jews divided all mankind into themselves and Gentiles. When they were the chosen people, Greeks and Romans called all outsiders barbarians. The Eurip- Euripides tragedy of Iphigenia in Aulis says that it is fitting that Greeks should rule over barbarians, but not contrariwise. Because Greeks are free and barbarians are slaves, the Arabs regarded themselves as the noblest nation, and all others are more or less barbarous. In 1896, the Chinese Minister of Education and his counselors edited a manual in which this statement occurs. How grand and glorious is the Empire of China in the Middle Kingdom! She is the largest and the richest of the world. The grandest men in the world have all come from the Middle Empire. In all the literature of all the states, equivalent statements occur, although they are not so naively expressed. In Russian books, newspapers, the civilizing mission of Russia is talked about just as in the books and journals of France, Germany, the United States. The civilizing mission of those countries is assumed and referred to as well understood. Each state now regards itself as the leader of civilization, the best, the freest, and the wisest, and all the others as inferior. Within a few years of own man on the curbstone has learned to class all foreigners of Latin people as Dagos or Dago has become an epithet of contempt. These are all cases of ethnocentrism. Definition of Moors, Chapter 9. When all the elements of truth and right are developed into doctrines and welfare, the folkways are raised to another plane. They are then They then become capable of producing inferences, developing into new forms, extending their constructive influence over men and society. Then we call them the Moors. The Moors are the folkways, including the philosophical and ethical generalizations as to societal welfare, which are suggested by them and inherent in them as they grow. Ah, Chapter 10. Purpose of the present work. Ethology would be a convenient term for the study of manners, customs, usages, and mores, including the study of the way in which they are formed, how they grow or decay, and how they affect the interests which it is their purpose to serve. The Greeks apply the term ethos to some of the characteristic usage, ideas, standards, and codes by which a group is or was differentiated and individualized in the character from other groups. Ethics were things which pertained to the ethos and therefore the things which were the standard of right. Romans used mores for customs in the broadest and richest sense of the word, including the notion that customs served welfare and had traditionalistic sanction so that they were properly authoritative and sacred. It is a very surprising fact that modern nations lost these words and significant suggestions which inhere in them. The English language has no derivating noun from no equivalent for it. The French moors, spelled with MEURS, is trivial compared to MORES, which is MORES. The German SIT, SITTE, site, renders MORES but very imperfectly. The modern people have made morals and morality a separate domain by the side of religion, philosophy, and politics. In that sense, morals is an impossible and unreal category. It has no existence and can have none. The word moral means what belongs or appertains to the Moors. Therefore, the category of morals can never be defined without reference to something outside of itself. Ethics, having lost connection with the ethos of a people, is an attempt to systematize the current notions of right and wrong upon some basic principles, generally with the purpose of establishing moral and absolute doctrine so that it shall be universal, absolute, and everlasting. In a general way, also, whenever a thing can be called moral or connected to some ethical generality, it is thought to be raised, and disputants whose method is to employ ethical generalities as assume a special authority for themselves and their views. These methods of discussion are most employed in treating of social topics, and they are disastrous to sound study of facts. They help to hold the social sciences under the dominion of metaphysics. The abuse has been most developed in connection with the political economy, which has been almost robbed of the character and a serious discipline by converting the discussions into ethical disquisitions. So why use the word mores? Ethica in Greek sense or ethology as above defined would be good names for our present work. We aim to study the ethos of groups in order to see how it arises, its power and influence, the modes of its operation on members of the group, and the various attributes of its etica. Etica. Ethology is a very unfamiliar word. It has been used in the mode of setting forth manners, customs, and mores in satirical comedy. The Latin word more seems to be, on the whole, more practically convenient and available than any other for our purpose as a name for the folkways with the connotations of right and truth and respect to welfare embodied in them. The analysis and definition above given show that in the Moors we must recognize a dominating force in history, constituting conditions to what can be done and as to the methods which can be employed. Page 9 out of 16. We're halfway there. Of course, the view which has been stated in antagonistic to the view that philosophy and ethics furnish creative and determining forces in society and history, that view comes down to us from the Greek philosophy, and it has now prevailed so long that all the current discussion conforms to it. Philosophy and ethics are pursued as independent disciplines, and the results are brought to the science of society and the statesmanship and legislation of authoritative dicta dicta dot. Is it dictatorship? I'm not sure, but it has dot. Okay. It can be seen also that philosophy and ethics are products of the folkways. They're taken out the Moors. They're never original and creative. They are secondary and derived. They often interfere in the second stage of the sequence, act, thought, act. When they produce harm, most some ground is furnished for the claim that they are creative or at least regulative. In fact, the real process in great bodies of men is not one of the deduction of any great principle of philosophy or ethics. It is one of the minute efforts to live well under existing conditions, which efforts are repeated indefinitely by great numbers, getting strength from habit and from the fellowship of a united action. The resultant folkways become coercive. They are forced to conform, and the folkways dominate societal life. Then they seem true and right, and arise into Moors as the norm of welfare. Sense are produced faiths, ideas, and doctrines, religions, and philosophies according to the stage of civilization and the fashions of reflection and generalization. Institutions and laws are produced out of mores. An institution consists of a concept, idea, notion, doctrine, interest, and a structure. The structure is a framework or an apparatus, or perhaps only a number of functionaries set to cooperate in prescribed ways at a certain conjuncture. The structure holds the concept and furnishes instrumentalities to bringing it into the world of facts and action in a way to serve the interests of men in society. Institutions are either coercive or enacted. They are sorry, are either crescive or enacted. They are crescive when they take shape in the mores, growing by the instinctive efforts by which mores are produced. Then the efforts through long use become definite and specific. Property, marriage, religion are most primary institutions. They began in folkways, they became customs, they developed into mores by the addition of some philosophy and welfare, however crude. Then they were made more definite and specific as regards to the rules, the prescribed acts, and the apparatus to be employed. This produced a structure and the institution was complete. Enacted institutions are products of rational invention and intention. They belong to high civilization. Banks are institutions of credit founded from usages which can be traced back to barbarism. There came a time when, guided by rational reflection on experience, men systematized and regulated the usage which had become current and thus created positive institutions of credit defined by law and sanctioned by the force of the state. Pure enacted institutions which are strong and prosperous are hard to find. It's too difficult to conduct and create an institution, for example, for a purpose out of nothing. The Electoral College in the Constitution of the United States is an example. In that case, the democratic mores of the people have seized upon the device and made of it something quite different from what the inventions planned. All institutions have ca- come out of mores, although the rational element in them is that their origin in the mores is not so ascertained except by a historical investigation, like legislatures, courts, juries, joint stock companies, and stock exchange. Property, marriage, and religion are still almost entirely in the mores. Among nature men, any man might capture and hold a woman at any time, if he could. He did it by superior force, which was its own supreme justification. By his act brought his group and her group into war and produced harm to its or to his comrades. They forbade capture or set conditions for it beyond the limits the individual might still use force, but his comrades were no longer responsible. The glory to him if he succeeded might be all for the greater. His control over his captive was absolute. Within the prescribed conditions, capture became technical and institutional, and rights grew out of it. The woman had a status which was defined by custom and was very different from the status of a real captive. Marriage was the institutional relation in society and under its sanction of a woman to a man, where the woman had been obtained in a prescribed way, she was then a wife. What her rights and duties were was defined by the Moors as they are today in all civilized societies. Laws, Chapter 14. Acts of legislation came out of the Moors. In low civilization, all societal regulations are customs and taboos, the origin of which is unknown. Positive laws are impossible until a stage of verification, reflection, criticism is reached. Until that point is reached, there is only customary law or common law. The customary law may be codified or systematized with respect to some philosophical principles and yet remain customary. The codes of Manu and Justinian are examples. Enactment is not possible until reverence for ancestors have traditional customs by positive enactment, and then during which traditional customs are extended by interpretation to cover new cases and prevent evil ground on the existing mores, and it soon becomes apparent that legislation to be strong must be consistent with the mores. Things which have been in the mores are put under police regulation and under positive law. It is sometimes said that the public opinion modify an imperfect analysis. The regulations must conform to the mores so that the public will not think them too lax or too strict. The mores of our urban and rural populations are not the same. Consequently, legislations about intoxicants which is made by one of these sections of population does not succeed when applied to the other. The regulation of drinking places, gambling places, and disorderly houses has passed through the above mentioned stages. It's always a question of expediency whether to leave a subject under the mores or to make a police regulation for it or to put it into criminal law. Betting, horse racing, dangerous sports, and the vehicles are cases now of things that which seem to be passing under positive enactment and out of the unformulated control of the Moors. When an enactment is made, there is a sacrifice of the elasticity and automatic self-adaptation of custom, but an enactment is specific and is provided with sanctions. Enactments come into use when conscious purposes are formed and it is believed that specific devices can be framed by which to realize such purposes in the society. Then all prohibitions take place of taboos and punishments are planned to be deterrent rather than revengeful. The mores of different societies or of all different ages are characterized by greater or less readiness and confidence in regard to the use of positive enactments for the realization of societal purposes. So, how laws and institutions differ from the mores? When folkways have become institutions or laws, they have changed their character and are to be distinguished from the mores. The element of sentiment and faith inherent in mores. Law institutions have a rational and practical character and more mechanical and utilitarian. The great difference is that institutions and laws have a positive character while mores are unformulated and undefined. Yes. There is a philosophy implicit in the folkways. When it's made explicit, it becomes technical philosophy. Objectively regarded, the mores are the customs which actually conduce to welfare under existing life conditions, acts under the laws and institutions are conscious and voluntary. Under the folkways, they are always unconscious and involuntary, so that they have the character of natural necessity. Educated reflection and skepticism can disturb the spontaneous relation. The laws, being positive prescriptions, supersede the mores so far as they are adopted. It follows that the mores come into operation where laws and tribunals fail. The Moors cover the great field of common life, where there are no laws or police regulations. They cover an immense and undefined domain, and they break the way into new domains, not yet controlled at all. The Moors therefore build up new laws and police regulations in time. True. Ooh. Inertia and rigidity of the Moors. We see that we must conceive the Morse as a vast system of usages covering the whole of life and serving all of its interests, also containing in themselves their own justification by tradition and the use and wont, and approved by mystic sanctions until, by rational reflection, they develop their own philosophical and ethical generalizations, which are elevated into principles of truth and right. It's a long sentence. They coerce and restrict the newborn generation. They do not stimulate the thought, but the contrary. The thinking is already done and embodied in the mores. They never contain any provision for their own amendment. They are not questions, but answers to the problem of life. They present themselves as final and unchangeable. Ah, because they present answers which are offered as the truth. No world philosophy until the modern scientific world philosophy, and that only within a generation or two has ever presented itself as perhaps transitory, certainly incomplete, and liable to be set aside tomorrow by more knowledge. No popular world philosophy or life policy can ever present itself in that light. It would cause too great of a mental strain, like what I'm having right now. All the groups whose mores we consider far inferior to our own are quite as well satisfied with theirs as we are with ours. The goodness and badness of Moors consists entirely in their adjustment in the life conditions and the interests of time and place. Therefore, it is a sign of ease and welfare when no thought is given to the Moors, but all cooperate in them instinctively. The nations of southern Asia show us the persistency of the Moors when the element of stability and rigidity in them becomes predominant. Ghost fear and ancestor worship tend to establish the persistency of the Moors by dogmatic authority, strict taboo, and weighty sanctions. The Moors then lose their naturalness and vitality. They are stereotyped. They lose our relation to expediency. They become an end in themselves. They are imposed by imperative authority without regard to interests or conditions, like caste system, child marriage, and widows. When any society falls under the dominion of this disease in the Moors, it must disintegrate before it can live again. In that diseased state of the Moors, all learning consists in committing memory the words of the sages of the past who established the formula of the Moors. Such words are sacred writings, a sentence of which is a rule of conduct to be obeyed while independently of present interests or of any rational considerations. Chapter 17, Mores and Morals, Social Code. Two more pages. For everyone, For everyone, the Moors give the notion of what ought to be. This includes the notion of what ought to be done for all that should cooperate to bring to pass in order of life what ought to be. Hmm, don't get it. All notions of propriety, decency, chastity, politeness, order, duty, rights, discipline, respect, reverence, cooperation, and fellowship, especially all things in regard to which good and ill depend entirely on the point at which the line is drawn, are in the Moors. The Moors can make things seem right and good to one group or one age, which to another seem antagonistic to every instinct of human nature. The 13th century bred in every heart such a sentiment in regard to heretics that inquisitors had no more misgivings in their proceedings than men would have now if they should attempt or exterminate rattlesnakes. The 16th century gave all such notions about witches that witch persecutors thought they were waging war on the enemies of God and man. Of course, the inquisitors and witch persecutors constantly developed the notions of heretics and witches. They exaggerated the notions and then gave them back again to the Moors in their expanded form to inflame the hearts of men with terror and hate and to become in the next stage so much more fantastic and ferocious motives. Such in the reaction between the Moors and the acts of the living generation, the world philosophy of the age is never anything but a reflection on the mental horizon which is formed out of the Moors of the ruling ideas which are in the Moors themselves. It is from a failure to recognize that the end and fro in this reaction, the current notion arises that the mores are produced by doctrines. The morals of an age are never anything but the consonance between on its between what is done and what the mores of the age require. The whole revolves on itself and the relation of the specific to the general within the horizon formed by the Moors. Every attempt to win an outside standpoint from which to reduce the whole to an absolute philosophy of truth and right based on an un- unalterable principle is a delusion. New elements are brought in only by new conquests of nature through the science and art. The new conquests change the conditions of life and the interests of the members of society. Then the Moors change by the adaptation to new conditions and interests. The philosophy and ethics then follow to account for and justify the changes in the Moors, often also to claim that they have caused the changes. They never do anything but draw their lines of bearing between the parts of Moors and horizon of thought within which they are enclosed, and which is a deduction from the Moors. The horizon is widened by more knowledge, but for one age it is just as much a generalization from the Moors as for another. It's always unreal, it's only a product of thought. The ethical philosophers select points on this horizon from which to take their bearings, and they think that they have won some authority for their systems when they travel back again from the generalization to the specific custom out of which it was deduced. The cases of inquisitors and witch persecutors who toiled arduously and continually for their chosen ends for little or no reward, show us the relationship between Moors and the one on the one side and philosophy, ethics, and religions on the other. Chapter 18: Honor, seemliness, and common sense conscience. Right. Honor, common sense, seemliness, and conscience seem to belong to the individual domain. They are reactions of the individual by the societal environment. Honor is the sentiment of one owes to oneself. Mm, it is an individual prerogative and an ultimate individual standard. Seemliness is conduct when which befits one's character and standards. Common sense, in the current view, is the natural gift and universal outfit. As to honor and seemliness, the popular view seems to be that each has a fountain of inspiration in himself to furnish him with guidance. Conscience might be added as another natural or supernatural voice, intuition, and part of the original outfit of all human beings as such. If these notions could be verified, and if they prove true, no discussion of them would be in place here. But as to honor, it is a well known and undisputed fact that societies have set codes of honor and standards of it which were arbitrary, irrational, and both individually and socially inexpedient, as ample experiment has proved, and have been accepted and obeyed by great groups of men who, in the folkways of the time, and who, in their own judgment, did not believe them sound. These codes came out of the folkways of the time and place. Then comes the question whether it is not always so. In honor, in any case, anything but the code of one's duty to himself, which he has accepted from the group in which he is educated, family, class, religious sect, school, enter into the social environment. In every environment, there is a standard of honor. When a man thinks that he is acting most independently on his personal prerogative, he is at best only balancing against each other of the different codes in which he has been educated. Example, that of the trade union against that of the Sunday school, or the school against that of the family. What we think natural and universal, and to which we attribute An objective reality is the sum of traits whose origin is so remote and which we share with so many that we do not know when or how we took them up, and we can remember no rational selection by which we adopted them. The same is true for common sense. It is the stock of ways of looking at things which we acquired unconsciously by suggesting from the environment in which we grew up. Some have more common sense than others because they are more docile to suggestion or have been taught to make judgment by people who were strong and wise. Conscience also seems best explained as a sum of principles of actions which have in one's character the most original, remote, undisputed, and authoritative position, into which questions of doubt are habitually referred. If these views are accepted, they have in honor common sense and conscience, other phenomena of the folkways, and the notions of eternal truths of philosophy or ethics derived somewhere outside of men, and their struggles to live under the conditions of earth must be abandoned as myths. Chapter 19. Ooh, last page. The ethnographers write of a tribe the moral that the morality in it, especially of the women, is low or high, etc. This is the technical use of morality as a thing pertaining to the sex relation only or especially, and the ethnographers make their prepositions by applying our standards of sex behavior and our form of sex taboo to judge all folkways of all people. All that they can properly say is that they find a great range and variety of usages, ideas, standards, and ideals which differ greatly from ours. Some of them are far stricter than ours. Those we do not consider noble or nobler than ours. We do not feel that we ought to adapt anyways because they are more strict, strict ah, than our traditional ones. We consider many to be excessive, silly, and harmful. A Roman senator once was censored for impropriety because he kissed his wife in the presence of his daughter. Meaning of immoral. When, therefore, the ethnographers apply condemnatory or depreciatory adjectives to the people whom they study, they beg the most important question which we want to investigate, that is, what are standards, codes, and ideas of chastity, decency, propriety, modesty, etc. And whence do they arise? The ethnographical facts contain the answer to this question. Immoral never means anything but contrary to the mores of the time and place. Therefore, the mores and the morality may move together, and there's no permanent or universal standard by which right and truth in regard to those matters can be established, and different folkways compared and criticized. That is the end of our Ethics 1 reading for today. My throat is so tired, and I think I needed a warm cup of tea. That's all. As you can see, I've been yawning 30 minutes in. But yeah, we'll be having quiz tomorrow. So wish me luck. That's all. Bye. End of stream.